Thank you for thinking about Your Education Matters. Chris Kennedy is the Superintendent of Schools CEO with the West Vancouver School District. A teacher by profession, Chris has been both an elementary and secondary principal and was featured by Maclean's magazine as one of the 100 young Canadians to watch. Recognized as a highly progressive voice in BC education, Chris is a frequent speaker on personalized learning and infusing technology into the classroom. He also writes the popular Culture of Yes educational leadership blog on BC education. His work has been featured in various local and national publications. Based on his work in education, Chris was recently named one of the top 10 Canadian newsmakers in educational technology by Mindshare Learning. Chris balances his professional passions with life as the father of 4 children under the age of 9. You can also follow Chris's thoughts on education on Twitter. We are pleased to welcome Superintendent Chris Kennedy to Your Education Matters. Chris, we like to let our audience know something about how people get to where they are in education. So before we get into the issues of the day, would you talk to us about your professional biography?
So I'm by trade a social studies teacher. I began teaching in Richmond. I went and taught at the same high school that I went to school at, on the same staff with my mother in the first year of teaching. And so I spent 5 years teaching socials and English largely, and then moved on to a vice principalship in Coquitlam. And a bit because of timing, there was a huge number of administrative retirements, and I got a chance to be an elementary principal, which I feel so fortunate for. So I went from a high school vice principal to become an elementary principal, and then had 3 years as a high school principal, and has spent almost my last 4 years now in West Vancouver, first as assistant superintendent, and now the last 2 years as, or just this last year as superintendent.
And what was your educational preparation for these different roles?
So my background is as a history and geography major through university at UBC, and just kept going to school. Did a diploma at UBC in law education, then went on and did my master's degree. And I guess still take courses today. I think we'll be taking courses forever now in the way the system works.
Right. Well, that's probably good for us, isn't it?
It is.
I wanted to ask you, as a superintendent, what you see as the priority issues that are coming across your desk these days. And I wanted to start our discussion by seeing what's on your mind these days in your role.
In my role right now, it's all about learning issues on my mind. There seems to be a worldwide trend right now that our current education system isn't quite a match for the current world. And some people here call it personalized learning, some people call it 21st century learning, but somehow we need to have a system where students have greater ownership over their own learning, where teachers are more of guides and facilitators and less of direct instructors, and where parents are actively engaged in their learning in different ways than we've seen before. And so I spend my days and keeps me up at night thinking about, well, how do we have to evolve our system in West Vancouver and in British Columbia to sort of meet the changing world needs?
Do you generally have the freedom and the resources to guide your district in this direction?
I'm pretty lucky in West Vancouver. I think what's really important is you have a strong working relationship with your board. And so as superintendent, I have an excellent working relationship with our board in West Vancouver, a board that knows an important role of governance, but knows that they hired me to make sure that we're going to lead learning and stay out in front. And I think what districts need in superintendents is sort of to see into the future a little bit, see 5 years and 10 years ahead and see where we're heading. And I feel I have the freedom right now to sort of help evolve a system and to begin to make changes so that we're doing the right things in place for not just for today and for the kids here, but as we move forward in the next decade.
What I notice in looking around North America is a lot of the action is moving away from discussion of accountability and toward discussion of outstanding teaching practices. Mm-hmm. And I know the Gates Foundation has moved in that direction among other entities. So actually tunneling down into what goes on in a classroom that can make the most dramatic kinds of difference. Does this have something to do with what you mean by learning issues?
Yeah, this phrase that I think superintendents need to be up to their elbows in learning right now. I like that. I think all of what I need to do, all the stuff I need to be focused on right now are those key learning issues, working with teachers, helping teachers get better at their practice, get better at what they do in the classroom. And so I think if a superintendent was more of a manager, or principals were more of managers, who we're hiring into our principalships right now are our very best teachers. That's who I want to have as leading learning in the schools. And we can teach some of those other necessary skills that come with the job of being principals, but we want our very best teachers to have teacher leadership roles and being the models and guides for other teachers in the system.
Well, one of the things that has bothered me from my days as a teacher right on through is the solitary nature of the job, whereas there ought to be more of a team dimension to it. I don't know how much you're able to remedy that, but I know in my own career it would be very, very rare that anybody qualified to critique my work or to really assist me would come in my classroom and know my work well enough to be a meaningful participant in its improving it.
I think actually BC has one of the best models in the network of performance-based schools, and Judy Halbert and Linda Kaiser, where they network teachers together from one school to another, inside districts and across districts around common themes. And to know that you're not the only one thinking about how you can improve your grade 4 reading. There are lots of people who are wrestling, lots of teachers wrestling with those same issues in different classrooms all across the province in slightly different contexts, and that how you bring those teachers together on an ongoing basis for some of those kind of conversations, I think that's some of the really exciting work. And then I see in our district what we're trying to do around creating time for teachers to actually co-plan together. And we have all 3 of our high schools who have what they call collaborative time, which is focused time weekly or monthly basis, depending on the school, where they're getting in deep on topics. And so at West Van Secondary School, they're talking about assessment in departments and across departments about what good assessment looks like. What happens at Rockridge Secondary in our district around the inquiry-based model and middle years IB, that there are the places where we can find time for teachers to work together, we're having really powerful results. And we see that inside our district and when our teachers network with other teachers outside our district as well.
How do the PSAs relate to this? They would seem to be a natural partner to what you're talking about.
Yeah, and so I think that you get some of the PSAs provide you a lot of that the content expertise into others in your content area. I think what we're able to do inside a district is to also get you across disciplines, and particularly in our high schools, we can be siloed in, the social studies teachers sit together and the English teachers and the math teachers, and they're actually, they seem to be working at almost competitive purposes to attract kids to their areas. What we're trying to do is that, more interdisciplinary work, more teachers from different fields interconnecting together, and then they funnel back through their PSAs into sort of more of that, the expertise and subject area.
I've worked a little bit with the PSAs in BC, and I've been impressed. You find such outstanding teachers associated with organizations like that, the teachers who are really committed to improving their practice. They have a place to go.
Yeah.
It's one of the many stakeholder groups we have in BC that is ready to make a contribution to improving education if we somehow had the setting for all these entities to interact.
I think there's a huge energy right now around trying to improve education. I think it sometimes gets lost in the politics of the day in terms of different parties trying to who use education as a wedge issue. But whether they're teachers or administrators or parents or these different groups, there's groups called the ASCD, BC ASCD, and the Staff Development Council of BC, Learning Forward, they now call themselves, and the different PSAs. There are all of these groups who are passionate about having an outstanding education system in BC and are just ready to go. And it's that, how do we pull together all of these different stakeholders into conversations so that they all feel included as we evolve the system?
Well, that's where political leadership can make a difference. And of course, it's a new day in BC politics, and maybe we'll get a new approach to bringing these groups together. With the appropriate influence of government, there is a role for the ministry, of course, but we mustn't forget all the stakeholders, and what they bring to the table.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of excitement right now around with a new Minister of Education, and the energy which was, it's largely, the government refers to it as their personalized learning agenda, and some people like the term or don't like the term, but I think most people like the characteristics that are in there, that we want to have students who are more inquiry-based. We like the idea of kids being creative and collaborative, that these are really good things that we want for a system. We want a system that is less test-driven and has more ongoing assessment, where kids given feedback about how to improve, because we know that makes a way bigger difference than when you give kids tests a few times a year and that they look at the mark and they toss it aside because they know that, and we know that actually doesn't make a difference in how kids improve their learning.
Well, I think there's been confusion in the public's mind between accountability, FSA testing, and the whole spectrum of the achievement contract that the ministry has tried to promote for almost a decade now. There always has been more than FSA testing to the ministry's view of evaluation and accountability. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. From the beginning, the ministry's always talked about, there's class-based, school-based, district-based, and provincial-based assessments, and we seem to have got stuck on the provincial-based assessment. Well, and one in particular, the FSA. Well, the teacher judgment actually matters a lot and can be hugely influential in terms of where we set direction in our district and where schools set direction in terms of school improvement plans. And what happens when we focus just on the conversation around FSA, you lend yourself to a narrowing of curriculum too, because then you just talk about reading, writing, and math. And there is actually a general agreement, there's a whole bunch more that we want out of an educated citizen graduating from our schools right now. And when I look at achievement contracts and I look at our school improvement plans, our schools are talking about environmental sustainability in the school and the skills they want around having kids with healthy lifestyles, whether that's being physically active or a whole bunch of the other social, emotional pieces that are tied to social responsibility. And that schools and districts are looking at this whole breadth of topics right now, but sometimes I think in the public we get stuck on a couple on one test and on only a couple parts of what an educated citizen is.
Well, it's really reached a critical level, that all the oxygen's been sucked out of the discussion in the public forum, not in the professional forum, but in the public forum. The oxygen's been sucked out in just this narrow realm, whereas that's not an accurate picture of what's been going on, even within evaluation or accountability of our schools.
It's so frustrating, I find, that there are only so many topics you can discuss in the public. There's only so much appetite for talking about education, and too often we get stuck on the wrong ones. And the deep ones about, well, what is it we want about our kids graduating? What are the characteristics we want about from our young people as they graduate high school? We don't get to have that really deep, rich conversation which speaks to the values of a society, because we get stuck on talking about one political a political issue or one particular assessment and miss the whole bigger part of education. And by the time we get to it, the educators talk about it, but we don't have that discussion in the public realm.
Well, of course, that's why Your Education Matters is here. Yeah. We're determined to broaden that discussion out and to give the educators a public forum, so they're not just spoken about, but they speak for themselves. We'll be back in just a moment with more of Chris Kennedy on Your Education Matters.
When I first came to SFU, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. So I started into a specialized French cohort program and got involved in the French Student Union, thinking for sure that I wanted to go into journalism. When I got into my second semester, I suddenly wasn't so sure what I wanted to do anymore. So I started to explore a little bit. Archaeology, communications, history, even kinesiology. And then I decided to go on exchange to France for a year. I was really enjoying my history classes and quickly realized that's what I wanted to study. But all the exploring I had done in other departments still counted towards my degree. I also got involved in campus life. I was an orientation leader for a year, became a community advisor in residence, helped start a choir, I even took a rowing course. Now I'm in my 5th year, studying a history major and French and poli-sci minors, and I'm still involved in residence. I'm an area coordinator now and working on sustainability initiatives around campus. After SFU, I have lots of possibilities of what I could do. International development, leadership, teaching, but whatever I do, I know I'll be ready for it.
Welcome back. Chris, you talked earlier in the program about the energy, the high energy you feel exists among the stakeholder groups, educators, and other persons interested in renewal of BC education. And I'd like you to talk about the way these people are talking with each other, because I know that you're involved in this informal networking besides the formal structure we have.
Yeah, I think there is a huge possibilities around what's happening right now in social media and in the web or the blogosphere or whatever those terms are that we use for it. There are hundreds of educators on Twitter in BC, and what happens in these conversations is it becomes less about what your role is and more about the ideas. And these are coalitions of commonly minded people who get together and have these deep conversations. And it doesn't matter which district you're in or what role you have, or if you're a parent or you're a teacher or you're a superintendent. It's a conversation about these ideas. And the number of teachers and administrators blogging, which is really just sort of that publicly reflecting about, these are my values and this is what I'm thinking about and this is the way we have to move the system. You know, it's a powerful way for us to have these conversations that I can post a blog and have, you know, a few thousand people read it and have, you know, all of these comments and conversations happening. Often our message, I think, in education gets filtered through politics, filtered through media, and this is a way for it to be unfiltered to the community and for these interactions and conversations to happen. And then those conversations are influenced by people outside of our province. And there are really interesting conversations happening in Alberta and Manitoba and Ontario right now who are talking about almost the same kind of things we're talking about in BC. They want the same things for their kids, and they have good systems like we do. And they still want to evolve their system. And then you grow that, and there are you know, I think the U.S., it often gets, well, you don't want a system like the United States. You know, we got to make sure we don't. Well, there are so many thoughtful educators there that can add so much to these conversations, and so we engage with them as well. And so these coalitions emerge where you have, you know, hundreds of people engaged in these conversations on a regular basis. It's, for me, the best professional learning, and it's a way of learning I didn't even know existed 3 or 4 years ago, and I just see it ramping up. It makes our system more transparent. It allows, it's open to everyone, and exposes our ideas to the world. It's pretty exciting, I think, what's happening right now.
We've seen too much partisanship introduced into public schools, and it has become a wedge issue in BC, and people have taken sides and made good guys and bad guys, and none of that's to the benefit of the children in the schools. You know, this is something that should be a team effort, a societal effort, and this is a new way to bring people together around the issue of having the best schools we can.
Yeah, one of the first posts I wrote was, I said, this place where we're going to engage in these conversations isn't going to be about people wearing the white hats and the black hats. There's a new way, and there has to be a different way we go about having these conversations. It's about ideas, and ideas aren't left-wing or right-wing, they're ideas, and there's good to have good pushback and good conversation around ideas, and what do we want for our system. Like, I think we need to have that. You want to continue to have a rich, vigorous dialogue about, well, what should our education system be? Or, you know, if we stop talking about it, that's when we lose. You know, we have an outstanding system right now in the province, and it's, you know, all those external measures say it's one of the highest performing in the world, but you have to keep pushing on the system if you want to keep it being relevant like it is.
Yes. The ideas can't be seen as static. They have to be worked with. And of course, that's the famous story of the FSA. It wasn't put in order to make league tables out of our schools. It was put in with good intentions, and it has a place where it can be used. You have told me about ways that it's used in classrooms in West Van. But unfortunately, as things are abused or misused or misunderstood, we have to make adaptations. So the ideas are never frozen in time and eternal in their implementation.
Well, and the way that education is reflective of a bit of the world that we're living in, too, at the same time. And so our system has to evolve. As the world around us evolves, I think a real problem for our education system is that if we get complacent we have a really good system. As the world changes around us, in 10 years, we'll go, whoa. Our system all of a sudden isn't relevant. We already hear from students, you know, especially in high school, saying, is this really relevant for the world I live in? You know, we talked a little bit about technology, where students, you know, they talk about they have to power down when they come to school. Well, they're engaged and immersed in technology in all other aspects of their life outside of school. So how do we figure out how we can work with that technology in the class? And it doesn't mean that kids should be plugged in all the time. There is lots of value in kids in that face-to-face discussion about technology being put away. But there is also a place that we have to figure it out. Well, this technology that's so relevant to how they live their lives, how do we make relevance of that in how they learn in school?
Well, I know that's something you think about because you're committed to using technology to improve instruction. So maybe you could give us an example or two of where you think we'll be as years go by now in the near future as to implementing technology into instruction.
Yeah, I think we've finally moved beyond the place where technology is a place you go to. You go to the computer lab to do a computer-related activity. Yeah. That was the way in of the last 25 years, and we're past that now. We're not too far away from every kid having a device. And I don't know what that device will be. I call it a gizmo because you don't get stuck in what it will look like. But a device that they can access the web, that all students will end up having their own space, a virtual space, where they can, almost like a portfolio they keep, where their work can be saved over time, where others can comment on and give feedback to. What I like about the technology is that you can also publish for the world. Instead of just publishing for your teacher, you're actually publishing for the world and getting real-world feedback. The work I've done with students is they absolutely love it when they produce work and they get comments on their work, and it's not just their teacher saying good job or giving them a letter grade. It's actually that authentic work, and it's published for the world. And I think we're going to see more of that. And there are dangers along the way, and that you have to deal with. But I think we're going to see more students having their own space on the web, students having their own devices. And it won't be about the technology, it will be about trying to improve literacy skills, because we know what I've seen is that kids who have a blog end up writing more and reading more. Mm-hmm. I know that in my life. I read and write more than I ever have before, and I don't touch a book anywhere near as much as I did 10 years ago.
Well, that's fascinating, yes, and I think, of course, along the way, we need to teach students the skills to sort out what they see on the internet. That's one of the most critical things that's coming along, because the internet comes without an editor. Librarians
are more important than ever, right? You often hear, the technology, I think, started from this idea that we could actually save money. We were going to put computers in, and they were going to help instruct students, and we wouldn't need libraries, and we wouldn't need this, and because, well, that's not true at all. Actually, your librarians are working side by side with your teachers around helping kids make sense of information. Before it was just 12 books that you had to go through to figure out which one you're going to do your report on. Now it's billions of websites, and so it's a whole different skill set we need to work with kids on.
Now, I wonder, standing back and looking at the kinds of things you've talked about, if you feel that the role of superintendent as it's currently described in BC gives you the autonomy and position to do the kind of work you want to do, or if you had the power to make some suggestions about realigning the job description, what you would say and do.
I love the idea that I'm supposed to be the chief learning officer in the school district, and I think that's something that we have to make sure that we protect, is that, I know that superintendents in other jurisdictions elsewhere in the world have different roles, and I go to work every day with the understanding that my job is to improve learning in the school district, every day, and work with teachers, work with administrators, work with parents. When I meet with parents, there is the other part of the job where you talk about budgets and you talk about transportation and you talk about that. But the core piece is that how are we going to make sure that our students are learning better, different than they did last year?
This chief learning officer idea, I noticed coming here after having served in a similar role in 5 American states, is for real. The superintendents here are more involved in instruction than I was accustomed to, and less involved in, for example, leading the effort to pass school levies, which is a major part of the role of a superintendent in most jurisdictions in the U.S. So I want our viewing public to know that this isn't just rhetoric. Because I've been to the meetings of the superintendents and I've seen how informed they are on these issues.
These are, my superintendent colleagues are a great network for me in terms of a learning network. They are some of the finest teachers I've ever met. They happen to be in the role of superintendent now, but that makes me feel good that I know where my kids go to school. The superintendent there, she's brilliant in literacy. And that's reassuring to know that the people that are leading our systems are some of our very finest teachers. I think, just as we want our principals and vice principals to be fine teachers, I think we want those in district roles to be some of our finest learning officials.
Well, I hope under the new administration and our new minister, we can get back to being a team in education, of having the stakeholders talking freely with one another, of not only the internet providing an informal network, but for our formal network also to function so that there can be open communication, and we can get away from the partisanship that has been eating up too much energy, I think, in BC education.
Yeah, too many conversations about politics, not enough about learning. And I think what your hopes are the hopes of everyone that I talk to. You know, in any role, they kind of want to get on with it. They go, we have a really good system, but there's a lot of great ideas out there about where we should go next. So let's some way get those ideas all in one place, and let's, you know, so that it's not an imposed idea of this will be the next way.
Exactly.
But we come together on this, and we, you know, there's a lot more in common than there is apart on a lot of these learning issues. We might disagree on some things politically, but on learning, most people want the same things for our kids. You know, we're in a post-high stakes era, clearly in BC. Nobody's saying we need to have more testing. You know, and I know in other jurisdictions and other places in North America, that's a legitimate debate. Should we have more testing? You know, that's not a legitimate debate in British Columbia. We actually believe that we want kids to be more inquiry-based. We want kids to work together with each other. We want kids to have more than just the core academics when they graduate from high school. That these are all things that we all want. So we just have to figure out a way to get all of these people that want very similar things together to push the system ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, for coming and sharing your ideas with us on Your Education Matters.
Thank you.
We'll be back in a moment. Have you thought back on your own education? What was important in helping you grow into the world? Perhaps as we grow up, there is a balance we look for in interacting with the world, observing events, taking them in, and then acting on our own environment, in asserting ourselves. Adults who raise children create the balance between learning and acting, between a useful humility of ignorance and a dangerous denial of ignorance. Teachers create this balance for large groups of young people. They reconcile many questions and needs into a class, a learning group. If we are lucky, we have authentic and communicative relationships with adults as we are growing up. Through their attention to us and engagement with us, we learn to be who we are in a framework of limits as well as of vision. We are so educated. Teachers make a definitive contribution to the education of young persons. In a conscious manner, they guide the study of the arts and sciences, encouraging analysis and communication. In a public school, teachers conduct education with society's values at the center of experience. Teachers build civil society. With this in mind, British Columbia has the right people teaching. Thank you for thinking about Your Education Matters.